I am here in Valula, Alabama at Friendship Baptist Church to speak with Pastor James P. Daniels concerning the role of the church in today's civil rights movement. The African American church has been very important and very significant in the role of the community, from slavery through the civil rights movement. It was the place that allowed everyone to gather. We gathered to share strategies for protests, for escaping the Underground Railroad, all of the things that applied to sharing information. Really, the African American church was the Facebook and social media of its time. It allowed people to speak and put out information without that information being shared with the opponent. So I'm going to speak with Pastor James P. Daniels today, and I would like for him to give us his perspective of what the role of the church is today, as opposed to how the church operated during slavery and during the civil rights movement. Okay, so I am here with Pastor James P. Daniels of Friendship Baptist Church. We are in Valula, Alabama. And I've asked Pastor Daniels if he could give us his perspective on the association of the African American church today, how it operates, as opposed to the role the African American church played in the history of the civil rights movement, as we celebrate the observance of Dr. King and the other pioneers of the civil rights movement. So, Pastor James P. Daniels, give us your perspective.
Yeah, the perspective is on today's church, which is slightly different based on technology, based on where we came from, which is the same methodology, which is having faith in a God we never seen, having faith in a God who will bring us through. In the old church, the methodology was from a slave perspective, but I believe back then it was faith that brought our foreparents and our forefathers through, with the understanding that God was the only one that they feel that they could call on, that could deliver them from fear. And through fear, I believe faith is what brought them over. And the same mindset today it may not be a slave mentality, but fear is still relevant. In other words, we're not seen as equals, we're seen as less than. And I believe the commemoration of the occasion of Dr. Martin Luther King was he wanted to see each person as equal. As no race, no gender, or whatever. He wanted to make sure everybody had an even playing field. In other words, a platform that they could be able to achieve whatever it is that they could achieve. Same school, same college, same church, and it wasn't about race, gender, or creed. It was just meant to see each other as equal.
Mm-hmm. So, in that, based on that understanding, have we achieved that goal?
I don't believe I don't believe we achieved it. We have come, the old church would say, we have come a mighty long ways, and we have. And we're able to go to school with same genders, same race, and but in certain areas we have not come. Jobs are still being held out for, because of race, color, gender. Pay raises are different because of certain areas. So yeah, we come a long ways, but there's still much work to do in the racial area. And then it's just like a baton. Dr. Martin Luther King carried his baton for his area or his era, but we are to pick up that same baton and teach our children, and so they can carry their baton as well to make it a better place to live, a place to, to work. Like I said, we come a long ways, but we still got much work to do.
Well, with me, when I look at the church and the role that the church played during slavery, the role the church played during the civil rights movement, it was a place to gather, to strategize, to determine how you were going to, approach a certain situation. You had lawyers there, you had doctors, you had people, you had journalists. Everybody gathered. It was kind of like the Facebook and the social media of that time. Are we operating in the same format? Does the church has the ability to reach out to the community? Is the community listening? Or does the leadership come out of the church now?
Right. Well, it was interesting you said that. I preached a sermon this morning based on Mark chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. And when we know the history of that passage of scripture, which was 4 friends brought this paralytic man to Jesus, right? And I titled this message, The Fantastic Four. And the reason why, because, of course, it was a movie and it was a cartoon, but I challenged the church to use this as character traits that we are to have to be able to reach others, to bring them to Jesus, right? Now, I use 4 C's. First of all, I use compassion. The church is meant to have compassion. The community need to know that the church is willing to help them, whether it's financially, whether it's food, wherever. And that's how the church operated in the past. The old church, people was farmers, they was gardeners, they would bring food. In other words, what one had, the other had. And that's how the church can affect today. The other one I used was courageous. In other words, we got to be courageous in our walk and not be afraid of what's going to happen. Because when you're courageous showing your faith, others can say, well, I can make it too. And I believe that's what Dr. Martin Luther King was. He was courageous. He was courageous in his march. He was courageous in his faith. And he didn't fear because he realized that God was with him and he was on a mission. The third thing I used was a friend of creativity. Like you said, there are many people in the church with many talents, and we got to be creative. We got to use what it is. This is why the early church survived, because the talents that was inside the church, they worked together to provide, not just for their family, but for the church. And this is why it was a strong bond. The church was a strong bond. Yeah, we have fallen away, but we still got to let people know through faith. The other one I used was Christ-like. Because this is what the church is. We ought to be Christ-like. We got to follow Christ's example, which was compassion. He went about showing compassion on all people. He didn't discriminate. What he thought one could have, the other one could have as well. And I believe that's what the community now, the churches are liking. We're not Christ-like. We're only concerned about the people inside of the building. And we forget about the people who are on the outside looking in, wondering what they have that we don't have. And this is why I believe faith-based, Christ-like will help us to reach those who are willing, to serve God.
Pastor Daniels, I really appreciate everything you have shared so far. But during our break, you spoke of the 4 Ps. Can you elaborate on the 4 Ps for me?
Yeah, one thing that I, as a pastor, as an author, as a teacher, I always like to give out nuggets, and within these nuggets, I always try to use something to encourage somebody. And in those 4 Ps, I believe the early church and even the church today, we can use these 4 Ps to help somebody along the way. And the reason why I said the early church, the first P I used was pain. Our forefathers experienced pain. I mean, they was slaves and they was beating and they was whipped. But in that pain, they never gave up. They kept their eyes open. They kept their faith real, and they understood that God was with them despite whatever circumstances they're in. And we may experience pain today in different ways when we look at the world situations, but we shouldn't allow that pain to prevent us from moving forward, which is the second P, is pressing. We are always to press our way forward. We don't have to stop, have a pity party, but we can press our way. And this is why I like David when he says in Psalm 23:4, he said, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. He pressed. He could have stopped. He could have had a pity party, but no, he kept pressing forward, understanding that there was light at the end of the tunnel. The other P is perseverance. You know, it'll be sad to say you're not going to go through anything. In other words, this journey is going to bring pain. It's going to bring suffering. It's going to bring failure. It's going to bring disappointment. But we don't have to hang our hats on that, because we can persevere. And this is what faith does. Faith allows us to be an overcomer. It allows us to focus on something that's real, that understand that with God, all things are possible. The last P is a platform, in which is, I believe, Dr. Martin Luther King would give us today. He had pain. He pressed his way forward. He persevered. But yet he still used his platform to encourage others, to let others know that despite the situation, despite there's no peace, I'm still able to accomplish what I set out was, which is to help somebody else along the way.
So we have gone through George Floyd. We were introduced to Black Lives Matter movement. This past week, we witnessed an insurrection at the Capitol building of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
How do we apply what you are saying now to that situation to see that it was clearly a difference in response? We got a chance to see one group get treated with the dignity and respect, even though they were operating under some domestic terrorist act.
Right.
So what can you share with the listeners that will point us in the right direction?
Well, you know, Frank, I had a friend out in Texas who was also a pastor. His family called for a wellness check, right? So they didn't send a wellness psychiatrist. They sent the police. So the cop gets to the house, realized that the pastor friend is irate. So they're inside the house. So the cop goes outside the house. The man follows them out and just tells them, look, just get off of my property. The cop tased him on his own property, shoots him 3 times in the chest. And the family said, we didn't ask for that. We asked for a wellness check because he had lost his job. And here it is, Frank, we're not seen as equal. And I would tell anybody that's going through, that have experienced George Floyd, you cannot take matters into your own hand. But we can be prayerful. We can do things peaceful. We can use our platform to make others aware. Because this is what Dr. Martin Luther King didn't. He did not take on violence. Everything he did was from a peace perspective. He did things peaceful. And we can learn a lot from him of not taking things in our own hand. Because if you bring a gun to a fight, eventually you're going to have to use that gun in that fight. And that's not what he did. He never picked up a gun. He fought things from a mind perspective. And he showed people with the mind you can overcome whatever it is that you're faced with. And that's the church today, and that's anybody today. If you have your mind renewed in Scripture, on a good education and do things, Frank, we can move society to a higher heights. In other words, we don't have to stay stuck on the bottom floor. We can move up the ladder with education. And I believe educating our young people to understand that college degree will get them so far, but you also got to have faith to help solidify all that you're doing.
Okay, Pastor Daniels, this conversation is becoming more and more compelling as we go. And again, I would like to thank you for your time. But when you look at the philosophy of Dr. King, when you study the civil rights movement, how did you see Dr. King? What is your picture of Dr. King and those heroes that were supporting him?
Yeah. You know, that's an interesting question, you know, and I look at my age, born, you know, August of 1963, and I look at the movement of Dr. King, and I look at his age, and me being a pastor now, which he was a pastor, I try to look how he is impacting my life even today, how I'm going to use my platform to let others know how he overcame. You know, and Frank, I like to write understanding. And there's one thing I wrote was, you have the right to dream. And I believe Dr. Martin Luther King, famous speech, I have a dream, can go a long ways. You know, from a child, from a kid growing up, understand I have a right to dream. In other words, whatever it is that I decide to do, I can accomplish what it is that I set my mind to do. And I believe those words that he spoke many years ago are still relevant to us, the black community today, that I have a right to dream. And in his words, Frank, and when you go to the monument, I had a chance a few years ago to go and look at all the things they had did in honor of him. All the famous sayings on the wall, the statue they had put in the center of this pavilion where I took pictures at, and I looked upon him as an icon with the understanding that he left us a legacy. He left a legacy for everybody. In other words, he was not selfish in his servant. And so when I look at him, Frank, I think of him as a pioneer. We know we had many fathers and forefathers that was pioneer, right? But I believe he was a different type of pioneer because he wanted justice for all. He wanted everybody to be able to achieve their dream, to be able to fulfill whatever it is they set out to do. So when I think about pioneer, which is simply 7 letters, but these 7 letters, when I looked at it, I looked at them in the eyes of Jesus Christ. And the reason why I say that, and I don't want to mix him with it, the reason why I'm saying that, it says by one man, evil entered into the world. One man we're justified, which is Jesus. In other words, God will always raise up one man to make a difference in the world. And that person was Jesus, but then that person is in the person of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So when I look at the P in pioneer, Martin Luther King was a patriot. He was a patriot. And he led a movement. And he had many followers for peace. So you can easily say the P word is peace. A patriot, and he did peaceful protests. But not only is pioneer, but the I is intercessor. In other words, an intercessor is one that goes to bat on behalf of somebody else. His movement was an intercessor. In other words, he wanted to make sure everybody had an opportunity to eat at the same table, to go to the same school. And not only was he an intercessor, but he was an overcomer. He's an overcomer because he overcome burdens. He overcome barriers. He didn't allow nothing to stop or get in the way of him letting everybody else taste or eat from the same table. I like the end. The end is never quit. He never gave up. He pushed forward until they took his life, which is the same thing. Look at Jesus. Jesus marched up Calvary Hill. He never gave up. He finished what he started up until the level that he had. But then also like the E. Dr. Martin Luther King was an encourager. His speeches, I have a dream. And many other speeches he gave was to encourage us that together we can make a difference. And you know, there's two E's in there. And the other E is equality. That's his legacy. His legacy was equality for everyone, regardless of the color of your skin. But then the R brings it home. Because of who he was, he seeked reconciliation. That's what he did, to reconcile. But he was a rarity, which is two R's, which, like I said, Dr. Martin Luther King, a legend, but he used his platform to make others aware of where they could go, not where they came from, not to drop down, not to allow fear to get in their way, but he wanted you to say, because he said one time, I've been to the mountaintop. So he let us know that you too can get to the mountaintop. But it was through faith that he did what he did.
Pastor James Daniels, you have covered a lot for us to listen to. Hit that refresh button and listen to it again. But everything we do, it comes down to legacy. Talk to us about legacy.
You know, legacy, it goes a long way. And I would like to, when I look at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who left a tremendous legacy, and many times legacy is after you have gone, after you have died. And the reason why I say that is I look at the life of Jesus Christ. He did great things for the movement, for us to have faith. But now that he was taken from us, now his legacy still lives on. I'm talking about Jesus Christ. His legacy, I preach, I teach Jesus Christ because of the faith that he gave us access to get to the Father. So that same thing, when I look at Dr. Martin Luther King, his legacy, he left behind us. His legacy still lives on. The voting, the right to vote, all that he stood for, we've seen it in this past election, that we thought that we should vote for something better. We know that promotion comes from God. In other words, where God takes one up, he's able to take one down and put in another. But the vote is because of Dr. Martin Luther King. His legacy, every time we vote, should be because of the legacy, because of the platform he used to ensure everyone else had the right to vote. It's because of him, but it's not because of anything else. And like I said, they can say that this election was rigged. But when we come together in unity, together, holding hands like a chain link fence, realizing nothing can break us, nothing can separate us, the movement is powerful. This is what he fought for. This is what he marched for. And this is what the peaceful protest was, that we will all have a right to vote. This is why we must teach our children that legacy is important, that you too have a legacy. And you must understand that your legacy will live on long after you have left this earth. So you have to ask the question, how will people view you after you have left this earth? Will they view you as something less than equal, or that you contribute to the movement to make others understand that they too have the right to vote?
Pastor James Daniels, I would like to thank you for your time. Thank you for your words of wisdom. Just thank you for everything you're doing. I hope the listeners pay attention to what you're saying, and I hope something was gained. Is there anything in the last minute remarks you would like to provide?
Like I said, I appreciate the opportunity to share wisdom with others because, like I said, we all have gifts. We all have different talents, and it's a shame that we don't use our gifts and talents to help others along the way. My dad told me one time, he said, son, if I tell you that there's a dead end at the end of the road, then you don't need to go down there. That was wisdom. That was wisdom to understand that. He told me I don't have to go down there. It's sadly today that many will go down there just to look over and see that they're dead end. In other words, what I'm saying is we waste time when I should be able to tell you there's a better way, and when together we can accomplish a lot through unity and through our faith in Jesus Christ. God bless you, may keep you is our prayer.